It was a Monday morning in early October when the illusion of an Alaskan autumn finally shattered. A lone hiker, a retired geologist named Arthur Finch, was making his way along the Turnagain Arm Trail, a path that offered breathtaking, if treacherous, views of the churning, silt-laden water below. The air was crisp, carrying the salty tang of the incoming tide and the earthy scent of decay as the foliage surrendered to the coming frost. Near Beluga Point, where the Seward Highway curved like a concrete serpent, something caught Arthur's eye. It was a flash of surgical green against the muted browns and grays of the rocky shoreline. He clambered down the slick embankment, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. There, snagged on a thorny wild rose bush, was a piece of clothing. It was a medical scrub top, the kind worn by nurses and doctors in every hospital in the country. It was stained, a dark, rust-colored pattern spreading across the chest. The fabric was stiff, frozen by the morning chill. Arthur, a man of science and observation, knew instinctively that the stain was not mud or grease. He gently untangled the garment from the thorns. On the collar's tag, stitched in neat black thread, were two words that would soon become a chilling refrain across the state: S. Jenkins. This is not just the story of a missing person, a single tragedy swallowed by the immense and indifferent Alaskan wilderness. It is the story of a new and terrifyingly modern predator, a monster who wore a mask of perfection crafted from pixels and code. It is the story of how the very tools we built to foster connection became a sophisticated hunting ground, and how the vast, beautiful landscapes of the last frontier were twisted into a desolate, unmarked graveyard. This is the chronicle of how one woman's profound capacity for trust was meticulously weaponized against her, leading her down a path from which she would never return. But it is also the story of how that same predator, in his arrogance, made a single, fatal miscalculation. It is the story of another woman, one whose analytical mind refused to be silenced by charm, who saw the subtle cracks in the flawless facade and chose to fight back. This is the unbelievable true story of how a brilliant nurse's disappearance ignited a desperate search, how a tenacious detective refused to let a case go cold, and how the courage of a near victim turned the tables on a psychopath, unmasking a killer hidden in plain sight. It is a tale of two women, two fates, and one monster who believed he was invisible. Sarah Jenkins was 34 years old. She was a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage, a job that demanded a rare combination of clinical precision and profound empathy. She possessed both in abundance. Friends and colleagues described her with a consistent litany of praise: kind, caring, dedicated, selfless. She was the nurse who would stay late to hold a frightened patient's hand, the one who remembered the names of her patient's children, the one who brought in homemade cookies for the night shift. Her character was not an act. It was the core of her being. Raised in a tight-knit family in rural Oregon, Sarah had been a caregiver her entire life. She was the oldest of 3 siblings, the responsible one, the one who patched up scraped knees and mediated childhood disputes. Her decision to become a nurse had seemed less like a career choice and more like a calling, a natural extension of her innate desire to heal and to comfort. She had moved to Anchorage 4 years prior, drawn by the promise of adventure and the raw, untamed beauty of Alaska. She fell in love with it immediately. She bought a small, cozy house on West 34th Avenue, adopted a goofy golden retriever she named Cooper, and spent her days off exploring. Her social media was a vibrant tapestry of her life. Photos of her and Cooper on the flat-top mountain trail, grinning against a backdrop of snow-dusted peaks. Images of her kayaking in the glacial blue waters of Prince William Sound. snapshots of her with a group of fellow nurses, laughing over beers at a local brewery. Sarah Jenkins was not a naive person. Working in an ICU, she had seen the darkest corners of human suffering. She had witnessed tragedy, violence, and loss. But through it all, she maintained a fundamental belief in the goodness of people. It was this optimism, this unwavering hope, that made her so good at her job. It was also the very trait that would make her fatally vulnerable. In the late summer of 2019, Sarah found herself in a place that felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She was lonely. Her 5-year relationship with a paramedic had ended amicably a few months earlier. They had simply grown apart, their paths diverging. But as the Alaskan summer began its rapid descent into the long, dark winter, the emptiness of her house felt more pronounced. The vibrant social life that thrived under the midnight sun began to hibernate, and the isolation she had never felt before started to creep in. Cooper was a comfort, but it wasn't the same. She craved conversation, connection, the simple warmth of a shared meal. Her friends, particularly her best friend and fellow nurse, Jessica Riley, were supportive. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, suggested she try online dating. "Everyone does it, Sarah," she had urged. "It's not like the old days. It's just how people meet now." Sarah was hesitant. The idea of reducing herself to a profile, of swiping through a catalog of faces, felt clinical and transactional. But the loneliness was a persistent ache. So, with a sigh of resignation and a flicker of hope, she downloaded the Hinge dating app, known for its slogan, "Designed to be deleted." She spent an evening carefully curating her profile, choosing photos that showed her love for the outdoors and her warm, open smile. She answered the prompts honestly, writing about her passion for nursing and her dream of one day seeing the northern lights from a remote cabin. She closed the app, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and excitement. For the first time in months, she felt a possibility of something new. A few days later, a new profile appeared in her feed. The first photo was striking. It showed a man in his late 30s with kind eyes, a confident smile, and a dusting of silver at his temples. His name was Julian. His profile stated his profession as a freelance photographer, specializing in landscapes and wildlife. His pictures were stunning, professional-grade shots of Alaskan scenery. A bear fishing for salmon, a majestic eagle in flight, the ethereal glow of an aurora over a mountain range. His written prompts seemed to mirror her own life and desires with an almost startling precision. He wrote about moving to Alaska to escape the soulless grind of a corporate job in Seattle. He mentioned his love for long hikes with his dog, a husky mix. He spoke of finding beauty in quiet, remote places. He even shared a line that seemed plucked directly from Sarah's own heart. "I'm looking for a partner in adventure and in life, someone to share a thermos of hot chocolate with while watching the world go by." He was, in every digital sense, perfect. She liked his profile. Within an hour, her phone buzzed. It was a match, and a message from him. "Sarah Jenkins, the ICU nurse with the heart of a hiker. I'm intrigued." The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. What began as a simple introductory message on Hinge quickly escalated into a deluge of communication. They moved to texting, and Sarah's phone was soon a constant stream of notifications from him. He was a master of the written word, charming, witty, and deeply attentive. He asked about her day, remembering the small details she shared about a difficult patient or a frustrating shift. He sent her photos he claimed to have just taken, a spectacular sunset over Cook Inlet, a moose grazing in a city park, making her feel like she was part of his world. This was love bombing, a systematic campaign of overwhelming affection and attention, designed to create a rapid and powerful emotional bond. Julian showered her with compliments, calling her beautiful, intelligent, and compassionate. He told her he had never felt a connection like this before, that it felt like he had known her for years. He would text her good morning the moment she woke up and stay up late talking to her until she fell asleep. For Sarah, who had been feeling so isolated, this constant validation was like a drought-ending rain. It was intoxicating. The centerpiece of his manipulation was the construction of his persona. It was not just a profile. It was a character exquisitely tailored to be everything Sarah Jenkins desired in a partner. He had studied her profile, her answers, her photos. She loved hiking. He was an experienced outdoorsman. She was a caregiver. He was a sensitive artist. She had a dog. He had a dog. He created a narrative of shared values and experiences that made their connection feel like destiny, not chance. To cement this bond and elicit her powerful sympathy, he introduced a fabricated tragedy. About a week into their constant communication, he grew quiet for an evening. When Sarah messaged him, worried, he eventually responded with a long, heart-wrenching text. He confessed that the day was the anniversary of his wife's death. He spun a detailed, poignant story of a college sweetheart named Clara, a vibrant artist who had died in a tragic car accident 5 years earlier. He wrote of his profound grief, his struggle to move on, and how talking to Sarah was the first time he had felt a spark of hope since the accident. The story was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It explained his single status, painted him as a devoted, grieving husband, and most critically, it made him appear vulnerable. It invited Sarah's innate caregiving instincts to the forefront. She felt a profound wave of sympathy for this wounded, sensitive man. The story created a deep, unearned intimacy between them. By sharing this secret, he was trusting her, which in turn made her trust him completely. The trap was being set, and Sarah, guided by her own best qualities, was walking right into it. After 2 weeks of near-constant digital communication, Julian suggested they finally meet. "I can't wait any longer to see if the woman I'm falling for through my phone is even real," he texted. A playful and flattering proposition. He suggested a casual brunch at Snow City Cafe, a popular, bustling spot in downtown Anchorage. The choice of a public, well-known location was deliberate, designed to put her at ease and project an image of safety and normalcy. Sarah was a bundle of nerves and excitement. She told Jessica Riley about the date, her voice buzzing with an optimism her friend hadn't heard in months. When Sarah walked into the cafe, he was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He stood up, and his smile was even more captivating in person. He looked exactly like his photos, perhaps even more handsome. He was tall, dressed in a casual but stylish flannel shirt and jeans. He greeted her with a warm, gentle hug that instantly melted her anxiety. The date was flawless. The conversation flowed as easily as it did over text. He was an incredible listener, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke, making her feel like the most important person in the world. He told charming anecdotes about his photography assignments, making his life seem both adventurous and accessible. He asked her about nursing, listening with what appeared to be genuine fascination and respect. He perfectly matched the persona he had created online. He was the sensitive artist, the grieving widower finding his footing, the adventurous soul looking for his partner. He paid the bill, walked her to her car, and gave her a soft, lingering kiss on the cheek. "This was even better than I imagined," he said. "I'm already counting the minutes until I see you again." Sarah drove home in a daze, her heart soaring. The last vestiges of her skepticism had evaporated. This was real. This was happening. She texted Jessica from her driveway. "He's perfect. I think this could be it." But amidst the whirlwind romance, small dissonant notes began to sound, almost too quiet to notice. They were red flags, subtle inconsistencies, and concerning behaviors, each one accompanied by a plausible, expertly delivered excuse. Julian was vehemently opposed to having his picture taken. Whenever Sarah tried to snap a selfie of them together on a hike, he would turn away or block the camera with his hand. "I spend my whole life behind a lens," he'd say with a charming laugh. "The last thing I want is to be in front of it." It sounded reasonable, the quirky eccentricity of an artist. It was, in fact, a crucial element of his operational security. He was also evasive about his personal life. He spoke in grand, sweeping statements about his past, but offered few verifiable details. When Sarah asked where in Seattle he had lived or which trails his late wife, Clara, had loved to paint, his answers were vague, and he would quickly change the subject back to her. He never invited her to his home, claiming it was a disaster zone of photography equipment and that he was embarrassed by the mess. They always met at her house or in public. Sarah, caught in the grip of powerful confirmation bias, unconsciously rationalized these inconsistencies. She wanted to believe in the perfection of Julian and their story. Her mind actively worked to smooth over the rough edges, to find explanations that fit the romantic narrative she was so invested in. His aversion to photos was artistic temperament. His vagueness was a symptom of his lingering grief. His messy house was just the sign of a busy, creative mind. She was seeing what she wanted to see. Her best friend, however, was not. Jessica Riley, grounded in a world of medical charts and vital signs, was a creature of data and evidence. The man she was hearing about sounded too good to be true. "It's just weird, Sarah," Jessica said one afternoon over coffee. "You've been seeing him for a month, and you've never met a single one of his friends. You've never seen where he lives, and he has no digital footprint besides that one dating profile. No social media, nothing." Sarah became defensive. "He's a private person, Jess. Not everyone lives their life online. You're just being cynical." "I'm being your friend," Jessica countered, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm just saying, be careful. My gut feels off about this guy." The warning, born of deep affection and genuine concern, was dismissed. To Sarah, Jessica's skepticism felt like an attack on her happiness, a judgment of her choices. She pulled away slightly from her friend, retreating further into the perfect, isolated world Julian had constructed for them. The warning system had been activated, but the person it was designed to protect had chosen to ignore it. As October deepened and the first snows began to dust the Chugach Mountains, Julian proposed the trip. It was the culmination of his grooming, the final and most critical phase of his plan. He told Sarah he wanted to make her dream come true. "Remember how you said you wanted to see the aurora from a remote cabin?" he asked her one evening, his voice a low, intimate murmur as they sat on her couch. "I found the perfect place. A little A-frame near Seward, totally isolated, with a glass ceiling over the bed. I've rented it for this weekend, just you and me and the northern lights." The offer was irresistible. It was the ultimate romantic gesture, a direct fulfillment of the fantasy she had shared on her dating profile. It felt like the universe confirming that this relationship was meant to be. This was the move to a controlled environment, a location of his choosing, far from the safety net of her life in Anchorage. He framed it as an escape, an adventure for just the two of them. She readily agreed, her heart filled with excitement and anticipation. This, she thought, would be the weekend that solidified their future. It was, in fact, the last decision she would ever make. On Friday afternoon, Julian picked her up from her house. She had packed a small overnight bag and arranged for a neighbor to look after Cooper. She sent a quick text to Jessica. "Heading out for our cabin weekend. Wish me luck. We'll text you when we get there." As she got into his dark green Ford F-150, a truck she'd only been in a few times, she felt a pure, unadulterated happiness. The man she was falling in love with was taking her on the trip of her dreams. The drive down the Seward Highway was breathtaking. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink over the snow-covered peaks. They listened to music, and Julian told her stories, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. The cabin, when they arrived, was just as he had described, but it was far more remote than she had imagined. It was nestled deep in a thicket of spruce trees, miles down a poorly maintained dirt road. There were no other houses in sight. The isolation was absolute. "Perfect, isn't it?" he said, smiling. "No one for miles." Inside, the cabin was rustic and cozy. A fire was already crackling in the wood-burning stove. He had brought groceries and a bottle of expensive champagne. He was the perfect host, attentive and doting. After they unpacked, he proposed a toast. "To us," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "And to a weekend we'll never forget." He then offered to make her his specialty cocktail, a warm, spiced drink he said was perfect for a cold night. She watched as he mixed it, her back to him for a moment, as she looked out the window. It was in that moment he crushed a small white pill and stirred the powder into her glass. The rohypnol dissolved without a trace. She drank the cocktail. It was delicious, warm and sweet. They sat by the fire, and he talked about their future, about traveling the world together, about building a life. But as he spoke, a strange, heavy fog began to descend upon her mind. Her limbs felt like lead. The room began to spin gently, the edges of her vision blurring. She tried to speak, to ask him what was happening, but the words wouldn't form. She looked at him, confused and frightened, and for the first time, she saw something else in his eyes. The warmth, the kindness, the love. It was all gone. In its place was a chilling emptiness, a void as cold and vast as a starless winter sky. His smile remained, but it was no longer a smile of affection. It was a predator's smile, a mask of triumph. The mask had finally, irrevocably dropped. She was in a trap, miles from anyone, with a monster she had invited into her life. Her last conscious thought was a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. From Julian Thorne's perspective, this was the moment of consummation. It was not about passion or rage. It was about control. As Sarah's body went limp, he felt a surge of euphoric power, the ultimate validation of his superiority. He had orchestrated every moment, every word, every emotion, leading to this precise outcome. He was the director, the writer, and the star of this private, perfect tragedy. He moved with a practiced efficiency that spoke of repetition. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. He lifted her from the chair and carried her to the bedroom. The act itself was swift, brutal, and impersonal. He chose manual strangulation, as he always did. The method was intimate, requiring physical proximity and sustained effort. It was for him the ultimate expression of dominance, the final, absolute extinguishing of another person's life and will. As her life faded, his sense of self swelled. He felt like a god. After, he stood over her, not with remorse or disgust, but with the cool, detached appreciation of an artist examining his finished work. The crime was complete. The next phase, the disposal, was merely logistics. Back in Anchorage, Jessica Riley glanced at her phone for the 10th time. It was nearly 10 p.m. Sarah had promised to text when she and Julian arrived at the cabin. The drive to the Seward area was only a couple of hours. A knot of anxiety tightened in Jessica's stomach. She typed out a message. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you made it safe and the cabin is amazing." She hit send. The message was delivered. She waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 30. No response. This was unlike Sarah. She was meticulously responsible, especially about safety check-ins. It was a rule they had for each other, a product of living in a state where a wrong turn or a sudden blizzard could be deadly. Jessica tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was no cell service at the cabin. That was plausible. She decided to wait until morning, but sleep didn't come easily. The off feeling she had about Julian was now a blaring alarm in her mind. The next morning, Saturday, there was still no word. Jessica called Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. That was the detail that tipped her anxiety into full-blown panic. Straight to voicemail meant the phone was off, not just out of a service area. Why would her phone be off? She called again and again with the same result. She texted, "Sarah, call me right now. I'm starting to get really worried." The message remained undelivered. The digital thread that connected them had been severed. By Saturday evening, Jessica knew something was terribly wrong. Sarah was scheduled for a shift at the hospital on Sunday morning. She had never, not once in 4 years, missed a shift without notice. Jessica drove to Sarah's house. Her car was gone, which was expected, but through the window, she could see Cooper's water bowl was empty. The neighbor who was supposed to be watching him wasn't due until Sunday. Sarah would never have left him without enough water, not even for a day. That small, overlooked detail was the final damning piece of evidence for Jessica. On Sunday morning, when Sarah did not show up for her shift at the ICU, Jessica Riley walked into the Anchorage Police Department headquarters on 6th Avenue and, with a voice trembling with fear and conviction, reported her best friend missing. The initial police response was predictably lukewarm. The officer at the front desk, a young, weary-looking patrolman, took down the information with an air of practiced skepticism. A 34-year-old woman goes on a romantic weekend with a new boyfriend and doesn't check in. To him, the story had all the hallmarks of a voluntary disappearance, not a crime. "Ma'am," he said, his tone placating, "adults have the right to be out of contact. She probably just lost her phone or is in an area with no service. She'll most likely turn up for work tomorrow." Jessica refused to be dismissed. She insisted, her voice rising with frustration, detailing Sarah's unwavering reliability, the dead phone, the empty water bowl. Her conviction was so absolute that the officer reluctantly agreed to file a report and dispatch a car for a wellness check at Sarah's last known location, her home on West 34th Avenue. The responding officers found what Jessica had described. The house was neat and orderly. There were no signs of a struggle. Her travel bag was gone. Her toothbrush was missing. On the surface, it looked exactly like a woman who had packed for a weekend trip, but the empty dog bowl and the turned-off phone felt subtly wrong, like a scene that had been manipulated to look normal. Still, without any concrete evidence of foul play, there was little they could do. The report was filed and sent to the Missing Persons Unit, another file in a thick stack of similar cases. The file landed on the desk of Detective Miles Corbin. Corbin was a 15-year veteran of the Anchorage Police Department, the last 10 of which he had spent in the Homicide and Missing Persons Unit. He was a quiet, methodical man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to see more than most. He had a reputation for being relentless and a near-legendary intuition that his colleagues called his gut. He read the initial report, then the supplemental notes from Jessica Riley's impassioned interview. While his colleagues saw a runaway romance, Corbin saw the faint outline of something much darker. The perfect boyfriend who no one had ever met. The sudden severing of all communication. The meticulous friend who was certain something was wrong. His gut was telling him this was not a simple missing person case. He made a decision. He pulled Sarah Jenkins's file from the missing persons stack and took personal ownership of it. He was now the lead investigator. Corbin's first move was to start digging into the only lead they had, the man named Julian. He assigned 2 detectives from the Digital Forensics Unit to tear apart the Hinge profile. The work began immediately. They downloaded every piece of data associated with the account, the photos, the bio, the location data from his logins. The first crack in Julian's facade appeared within an hour. A detective ran the stunning profile photo through a reverse image search. The results came back not to a freelance photographer in Alaska, but to a German menswear model named Klaus Richter. The photo had been stolen from an online clothing catalog. They ran the other photos, the beautiful landscape shots. Most were generic stock images, easily purchased online. A few, however, were unique. They carried metadata, but it had been scrubbed clean. The team then turned to the digital trail. They subpoenaed Hinge for the IP addresses used to create and access the account. The results were a testament to the antagonist's sophistication. The IP addresses were a tangled mess, bouncing from public Wi-Fi hotspots at cafes and libraries across Anchorage, all routed through a series of encrypted virtual private networks, VPNs. The perpetrator had built a digital fortress around his identity. He was a ghost. All they knew for sure was that Sarah had gone away for the weekend with a man who did not exist. For a week, the investigation stalled. Corbin and his team interviewed Sarah's friends, family, and colleagues. They all told the same story. Sarah was happy, in love with a wonderful man named Julian, a photographer. No one had ever met him. No one had a last name. No one had a license plate number. The digital trail was a dead end. The physical trail was non-existent. The case was turning cold before it had even begun. Corbin felt a rising tide of frustration. He knew Sarah Jenkins was not on a voluntary vacation. He knew she was in terrible danger, or worse. But he had nothing. Then came the call from the state troopers on that cold Monday morning, a week after Sarah had vanished. A hiker on the Turn Again Arm Trail had found a piece of clothing, a medical scrub top. The name on the tag was S. Jenkins. Corbin and a crime scene unit team were at Beluga Point within the hour. The location was significant. It was a scenic overlook, a place tourists and locals stopped to take pictures. It was also a place where someone could pull over for a few minutes, dispose of an item over the embankment, and disappear back into the flow of traffic on the Seward Highway unnoticed. The scrub top was carefully collected and sent to the state crime lab in Anchorage. The wait for the results was agonizing. 2 days later, the lab supervisor called Corbin directly. "You need to come down here," she said, her voice grim. Corbin drove to the lab. The supervisor laid out the report. The dark stain on the shirt was blood. They had managed to extract a DNA profile from it. It was a perfect match to the DNA from Sarah Jenkins' hairbrush, which they had collected from her home. The case had just transformed. This was no longer a missing person investigation. It was now officially a homicide. The confirmation of foul play immediately escalated the scope and urgency of the investigation. Corbin now had the authority to dedicate more resources to the case. He briefed the APD chief, who, recognizing the complexity of the digital phantom they were hunting, approved Corbin's request to bring in federal assistance. The Anchorage field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was formally brought onto the case. The FBI contributed agents with expertise in cybercrime and, most importantly, access to the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, in Quantico, Virginia. Corbin's team compiled every piece of information they had: the fake profile, the love bombing described by Jessica, the sophisticated use of VPNs, the remote lure, the evidence of a swift, controlling crime, and sent it to the BAU. The profilers at Quantico began to construct a detailed psychological portrait of their unknown subject, or unsub. The profile they sent back was chillingly specific. They were looking for a white male, likely in his late 30s to early 40s. He was highly intelligent, organized, and methodical. He was a narcissist with psychopathic tendencies, completely lacking in empathy. He derived a sense of power and control from the manipulation and ultimately the murder of his victims. He was likely superficially charming and socially adept, able to mimic human emotion perfectly in order to achieve his goals. The profile also contained a stark warning. This level of planning and operational security is not indicative of a first-time offender. It is highly probable that this subject has killed before and will kill again. Armed with this profile, FBI analysts began a painstaking process of pattern recognition. They expanded their search beyond Alaska, creating a query for missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho that shared key characteristics with Sarah's disappearance. They looked for women in their 30s or 40s, recently single, who had been active on dating apps and had vanished without a trace after meeting a new, charismatic man. The search returned several potential matches. One stood out, a 38-year-old woman in Portland, Oregon, who had disappeared a year earlier. Another was a 41-year-old man in Bellevue, Washington, who had also vanished. Both had been lured into new relationships through dating apps. The connections were tenuous, but a horrifying pattern was beginning to emerge. They were not hunting a man who had killed once. They were hunting a serial killer. Months passed. The Alaskan winter settled in, blanketing the state in darkness and snow. The investigation into Sarah Jenkins' murder grew colder with each passing day. Detective Corbin and his team chased down dozens of fruitless leads. They interviewed known offenders who matched the profile. They analyzed countless hours of traffic camera footage from the Seward Highway on the weekend Sarah disappeared, looking for a vehicle that appeared on no other cameras, a ghost car. But they found nothing. Julian Thorne, or whatever his real name was, had vanished as completely as his victims. The case file grew thicker, filled with dead ends and frustration. For Corbin, it became a personal obsession. He kept Sarah's photo on his desk, a constant silent reminder of the promise he had made to Jessica Riley, that he would find her friend and bring her home. Meanwhile, the predator was not dormant. He was patient. After the intensity of the investigation into Sarah's disappearance, Julian Thorne had gone to ground. He stayed off the apps, lived a quiet, unassuming life in his small house in Eagle River, a suburb of Anchorage. He worked odd jobs, cash only, and maintained his cover as a reclusive artist. But the compulsion, the deep, narcissistic need for control and adulation, was a hunger that could not be starved forever. By early spring, he decided it was time to hunt again. He created a new identity, a new mask. This time, he was Alex, an environmental scientist working on a climate change study for a prestigious research institute. His profile pictures were a mix of stolen photos of a handsome geologist and breathtaking shots of glaciers and ice fields, some of which he had actually taken. He reactivated his digital arsenal, this time choosing the dating app Bumble, where women make the first move, a dynamic he found intriguing. He began to swipe. His new target was Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was 42, a senior geologist for a major oil company based in Anchorage. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, and possessed a mind that was trained to see patterns, to analyze data, and to question assumptions. Like Sarah, she was single and, after a long and demanding work project, was feeling a pang of loneliness. She was on Bumble more out of curiosity than a desperate need for connection. When she saw Alex's profile, she was impressed. He was handsome, had an interesting career that complemented her own, and seemed intelligent and articulate. She made the first move, sending a simple message. "A fellow scientist in the wild. Your work looks fascinating." The familiar pattern began immediately. Alex responded with the same intense, overwhelming charm that had captivated Sarah. The love bombing was relentless. He praised her intelligence, her successful career, her beauty. He mirrored her interests with uncanny accuracy. She mentioned her love for classical music. The next day, he sent her a link to a piece by Debussy. He said reminded him of her. She talked about a complex geological formation she was studying. He responded with insightful, seemingly knowledgeable questions. But Evelyn Reed was not Sarah Jenkins. Her mind was not wired for confirmation bias. It was wired for critical analysis. While one part of her was flattered by the attention, another part, the geologist part, the scientist part, remained detached, observing, collecting data. Subtle red flags began to appear. And unlike Sarah, Evelyn did not rationalize them away. She logged them. Red flag number 1. He claimed to work for the Scripps Institution of Oceanography on a joint project in Alaska. But when she casually mentioned a colleague who worked there, he quickly changed the subject. Red flag number 2. His stories about his fieldwork, while superficially impressive, lacked the specific, granular details a real scientist would know. He spoke of analyzing ice cores, but couldn't answer a basic question about isotopic fractionation. Red flag number 3. The photo issue. Just like with Sarah, he was allergic to new pictures. When she asked for a current selfie during a video call he had reluctantly agreed to, he angled the camera away, claiming the lighting was bad. During that same call, she noticed his eyes didn't quite match the color in his profile photos. It was a tiny detail, but it registered. The final decisive red flag came during a text exchange. He was pressuring her to go on a weekend trip with him to a friend's cabin near Talkeetna. The pressure felt off. It was too soon, too intense. In the middle of this exchange, he sent her a photo of a sunset, saying he had just taken it. But Evelyn was a tech-savvy woman. She downloaded the image and, on a whim, did something she had never done before. She performed a reverse image search. The results loaded on her screen, and a chill ran down her spine. The photo was not a personal snapshot. It was a stock photo, available for purchase on several websites. The file name was Alaskan_sunset_04b.jpg. In that moment, the entire artifice crumbled. He was a fraud. The job, the stories, the photos, it was all a lie. Her mind, trained to connect disparate points of data, flew into overdrive. The fake profile, the intense grooming, the pressure to go to a remote location, the stories of Sarah Jenkins's disappearance, which had been all over the news for months, suddenly flooded her thoughts. A handsome, mysterious new boyfriend, a remote trip, a woman who vanished. It was the same pattern, the same methodology. The man she was talking to was not a suitor. He was a predator, and he was hunting her. Her first instinct was fear, a primal urge to block him, delete the app, and disappear. But then a different instinct took over. The scientist's instinct to document, and the human instinct to protect others. She did not confront him. She did not block him. She saved the conversations, took screenshots of the profile, and the next morning, Dr. Evelyn Reed walked into the Anchorage Police Department and asked to speak with the lead detective on the Sarah Jenkins case. Detective Miles Corbin was sitting at his desk, staring at Sarah's photo, when a uniformed officer told him a woman was in the lobby insisting she had information about his case. He was skeptical. They had received dozens of tips from psychics, conspiracy theorists, and well-meaning but mistaken citizens. But he agreed to see her. Evelyn Reed walked into his office, calm and composed, and laid her phone on his desk. "I believe the man who killed Sarah Jenkins is currently trying to do the same thing to me," she said, her voice steady and clear. For the next hour, she walked Corbin through her entire interaction with Alex, presenting her findings with the precision of a scientific paper. She showed him the fake profile, the contradictory statements, the reverse image search results, the pressure for the remote trip. It was the breakthrough Corbin had been praying for 6 months. The ghost had made a mistake. He had targeted the wrong woman. Evelyn's tip re-energized the entire investigation. They had an active target. At Corbin's request, Evelyn agreed to continue communicating with Alex, allowing the police to monitor their interactions in real time. They now had a digital window into the killer's life. The first order of business was to find his physical location. The team focused on the burner phone he was using. Evelyn complained to him about the poor call quality, subtly prompting him to use it more. With a court warrant, the FBI's cyber team, working with cell service providers, began the process of triangulation. The phone was pinging off a cell tower that serviced the Eagle River area. It was a large area to cover, but it was a start. The next break came from a seemingly insignificant detail. During one of their monitored calls, Alex told Evelyn he needed to run out and top up his phone. Corbin's team immediately cross-referenced all the stores that sold prepaid phone cards in the Eagle River area. They focused on gas stations and convenience stores along the Glen Highway. They pulled security footage from a dozen locations, looking for a man who matched the general description from the BAU profile and the fuzzy image Evelyn had from their one video call. It was painstaking work, hours and hours of grainy footage. Then a detective shouted. On the screen, at a Car's Safeway gas station, was a man buying a track phone top-up card. He was tall, fit, with salt and pepper hair. He paid in cash. As he walked out, the camera caught a clear shot of him getting into his vehicle. A dark green, slightly older model, Ford F-150. It was a match. The team got the license plate number. They ran it through the DMV database. The system returned a single result. The truck was registered to a Julian Thorne with an address at a small, single-story house on a wooded lot in Eagle River. The name meant nothing to them, but the address was right in the center of their triangulation zone. They ran the name through their databases. Julian Thorne, age 39. He had a driver's license photo on file. Corbin showed it to Evelyn. "That's him," she said without hesitation. "That's Alex." They finally had a name and a face for their ghost. The final piece of the puzzle came from out of state. With a name, Corbin could now dig into Julian Thorne's past. Records showed he had moved to Alaska from Seattle 2 years ago. He had a clean record in Alaska, but a search of Washington state records revealed a messy divorce. Corbin contacted the Seattle Police Department and got the name of the ex-wife. He called her. At first, she was hesitant to speak, but when Corbin mentioned he was a homicide detective investigating a missing woman, she opened up. The story she told was horrifying. She described Julian as a brilliant, charming man who had slowly revealed himself to be a textbook psychopath. She spoke of his complete lack of empathy, his need for control, his pathological lying. She told Corbin about his chilling, secret fascination with serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy. He studied them, she said, her voice shaking. He talked about their mistakes, how they could have been smarter. I felt like he was practicing on me, learning how to control someone completely. When I finally left him, I felt like I had escaped. The ex-partner's corroboration was the final confirmation. The BAU profile, Evelyn's analysis, and the ex-wife's testimony all painted a picture of the same man. They had found their monster. The time for surveillance was over. The risk of Julian spooking and disappearing again, or worse, trying to harm Evelyn, was too high. The district attorney signed off on the arrest and search warrants. The operation was planned with tactical precision. Given the subject's profile, they had to assume he was dangerous and prepared. In the pre-dawn hours of a cold April morning, a heavily armed APD SWAT team, accompanied by FBI agents and Detective Corbin, descended on the quiet, wooded property in Eagle River. They surrounded the small house. On Corbin's command, they breached the front door with a battering ram, shouting, "Police! Search warrant!" They found Julian Thorne in his bedroom. He was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed as if he were expecting them. He showed no surprise, No fear, no resistance. He calmly put his hands behind his back and allowed them to cuff him. As they led him out of the house, his eyes met Corbin's. He offered a small, knowing, and utterly chilling smirk. The chameleon had been captured. With Julian Thorne in custody, the search of his house began. It was immediately clear this was not just a home, it was a predator's lair. While the main living areas were Spartan and neat, the basement told a different story. Behind a newly constructed wall, they found a hidden, soundproofed room. The air inside was cold and sterile. In the center of the room was a single metal chair. The concrete floor showed signs of having been recently and thoroughly scrubbed with bleach. But the forensics team was confident they could still find trace evidence. The most damning discovery was made in Julian's bedroom. Tucked away in a locked footlocker at the bottom of his closet was his trophy collection. It was a curated archive of his crimes. Inside, neatly organized in plastic bags, were personal items from his victims. There was a silver necklace, a woman's watch, a university keychain, and a collection of driver's licenses. One of them belonged to a 38-year-old woman from Portland, Oregon. Another belonged to a man from Bellevue, Washington. And there, at the top of the stack, was Sarah Jenkins's Alaska driver's license. Her smiling face looked up at Corbin, a ghost from a life stolen. The digital forensics team, meanwhile, was working on the array of computers and hard drives seized from the house. While many of the drives were encrypted, one was not. It contained Julian's planning documentation. It was a series of meticulously organized folders. Each folder was named for a target, a potential victim he had been stalking. One folder was labeled S. Jenkins. Another was labeled E. Reed. Inside Sarah's folder were screenshots of her social media, notes on her schedule, her likes and dislikes, and a chillingly detailed plan for the Seward cabin scenario. Evelyn's folder was less complete, but showed he had been building a similar file on her. He wasn't just an opportunist, he was a project manager of murder. The final nail in the coffin came from the forensics team in the basement. Using advanced chemical agents, they found traces of blood that had soaked into the concrete floor. The DNA profile came back a few days later. It was a perfect match to Sarah Jenkins. The evidence was not just overwhelming, it was absolute. At the Anchorage jail, Julian Thorne was initially silent. He sat through hours of questioning with his lawyer, offering no comment, his smug demeanor never wavering. But as the evidence mounted, the trophies, the computer files, the DNA match, his lawyer advised him that a trial would be a suicidal endeavor. The prosecution had a mountain of irrefutable proof. His only leverage was the one thing the police didn't have: the location of the bodies. Faced with this reality, and perhaps seeing an opportunity for one last performance, one last moment in the spotlight, Julian agreed to talk. His confession was not a moment of remorseful catharsis. It was a long, detailed, and horrifyingly clinical monologue. He spoke for hours without a flicker of emotion, describing his methods with the pride of a master craftsman discussing his art. He detailed how he selected his victims based on their perceived vulnerability and kindness, traits he saw as weaknesses to be exploited. He explained his process of creating fake personas, a task he referred to as character development. He confessed to the murder of Sarah Jenkins, describing the act with a detached, observational quality that made the detectives in the room feel sick. He also confessed to the murders of the woman in Oregon and the man in Washington. When Corbin asked him why, Julian paused, a thoughtful expression on his face, as if genuinely considering the question for the first time. Power, he finally said. The absolute, ultimate control over another human being. To build them up with a fantasy, and then to be the one who decides when their story ends. It's the purest form of power that exists. I was a curator of souls. He showed no remorse, only a profound, narcissistic pride in his work. With 3 confirmed murders and the evidence in hand, the Anchorage District Attorney's Office prepared to seek the death penalty. However, there was a more pressing humanitarian concern. The victims' families were desperate to bring their loved ones home. The bodies of Sarah Jenkins and the other 2 victims were still missing, likely buried somewhere in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. The lead prosecutor, in consultation with the families, made a difficult decision. They offered Julian Thorne a bargain if he would lead them to the locations of all his victims' bodies, providing closure for the families. They would take the death penalty off the table and agree to a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Julian, who feared the loss of control inherent in an execution, and for whom a life sentence meant he could continue to exist as an object of fascination, it was an acceptable trade. He agreed to the plea agreement. The recovery process was a series of grim, surreal processions. Julian Thorne, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, was flown back to Oregon and Washington, where he led authorities to the remote, wooded areas where he had buried his first 2 victims. Then, back in Alaska, he directed a convoy of law enforcement vehicles north of Anchorage, up into the rugged mountains of Hatcher Pass. The area was a popular destination for hikers and skiers, a place of stunning natural beauty. He led them off a trail into a dense grove of birch trees. He stopped and pointed to a patch of ground. "She's here," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. An excavation team began to dig. A few feet down, they found the remains of Sarah Jenkins. After months of desperate searching and unanswered questions, Detective Corbin could finally make the call to Jessica Riley and Sarah's parents. He had kept his promise. He was bringing her home. The sentencing hearing was held in a packed Anchorage courtroom. It was not a trial, but a formality to accept the plea agreement and provide a venue for the final act of justice. The room was heavy with grief. The families of all 3 victims were present. One by one, they stood and read their victim impact statements, their voices thick with pain and anger, their words directed at the impassive figure of Julian Thorne sitting at the defense table. Sarah's father spoke of his daughter's light, her kindness, her boundless love for life. Her mother wept as she described the unending nightmare of her loss. Then Jessica Riley stood up. She stared directly at Julian, her eyes blazing with fury. "You are not a god," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You are not a curator. You are a black hole in a human suit, a void that only knows how to consume. But Sarah's light was brighter than your darkness, and you did not extinguish it. You only made us see it more clearly." In the gallery, Dr. Evelyn Reed sat watching, a silent, powerful testament to his ultimate failure. Before delivering the sentence, the presiding judge, a stern, veteran jurist, removed his glasses and spoke directly to Julian Thorne. His condemnation was scathing and absolute. He called Julian's actions the epitome of calculated, narcissistic evil, and lamented that the law did not allow for a punishment that could truly fit the depth of his depravity. He then formally sentenced Julian Thorne to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 99 years for the kidnapping. "You will leave this courtroom today," the judge concluded, "and you will spend every remaining day of your natural life in a cage, buried in the concrete and steel of the prison system. You will die in prison. May God have mercy on your soul, for the state of Alaska will not." A wave of quiet, cathartic relief washed over the gallery. Justice, in its final, imperfect form, had been served. Months later, a memorial service was held for Sarah Jenkins at a community hall in Anchorage. It was not a somber funeral, but a celebration of her life, just as her family knew she would have wanted. The hall was filled to overflowing with hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. colleagues from the hospital shared stories of her compassion and skill. Friends laughed through tears as they recalled her adventurous spirit and infectious smile. Even former patients, people she had cared for years ago, came to pay their respects, speaking of the kindness she had shown them in their darkest hours. Her life, though tragically cut short, had created ripples of goodness that spread far and wide. The sheer number of people there was a powerful rebuke to the empty nihilism of her killer. Her life had mattered. It had mattered immensely. In the wake of the tragedy, Sarah's family, together with Jessica Riley, refused to let her death be just another statistic. They were determined to create a lasting legacy of positive change. They established the Sarah's Light Foundation, a nonprofit advocacy group with a dual mission: education and reform. The foundation developed educational programs for high schools and colleges, teaching young people about the dangers of online grooming and the subtle signs of predatory behavior. They also began a tireless campaign to lobby dating app companies for better safety features. They partnered with Dr. Evelyn Reed, who became a powerful spokesperson for the cause. Her story, a compelling example of the importance of trusting one's intuition. The impact of the case and the foundation's work was tangible and far-reaching. Spurred by public outcry and the foundation's advocacy, the Alaska state legislature passed a new bill, quickly dubbed Sarah's Law. The law streamlined the process for law enforcement to obtain emergency warrants for digital evidence in credible missing person cases linked to online dating, closing a loophole that had slowed the initial investigation into Sarah's disappearance. The case also drew national media attention. Documentaries and podcasts dissected Julian Thorne's methods, raising widespread public awareness about this modern form of predation. Under pressure, major dating platforms, including Hinge and Bumble, implemented significant changes. They introduced mandatory photo verification systems, made it easier for users to report suspicious profiles, and partnered with organizations like the Sarah's Light Foundation to provide safety tips and resources directly within their apps. Sarah's tragedy had become a catalyst for systemic change, protecting countless others from a similar fate. And what of the killer? Julian Thorne was transferred to Spring Creek Correctional Center, Alaska's only maximum security prison, a bleak fortress of concrete and steel located near Seward, not far from the area where he had lured Sarah to her death. He lives his life in a small cell, his days dictated by bells and guards. The absolute control he craved is now completely lost. He remains unremorseful, a subject of fascination for a handful of forensic psychologists and criminologists who study him in an attempt to better understand the psychopathic mind. He has, in a twisted way, achieved the infamy he likely desired, but it is a hollow, pathetic fame. He is no longer a chameleon, able to change his colors to deceive and manipulate. He is just an inmate, a number in a system, his power reduced to the four walls of his cell. He will die there, a forgotten monster in a cold, lonely place. This story stands as a stark testament to the profound duality of our modern, hyper-connected world. The digital platforms we have built to conquer loneliness and forge new relationships have also inadvertently created new, shadowy hunting grounds for the oldest forms of evil. Julian Thorne was a predator perfectly adapted to this new environment, a chameleon who understood that in the world of curated profiles and manufactured intimacy, trust could be engineered and vulnerability could be weaponized. His story is a chilling cautionary tale about the dangers of seeing only what we want to see, of allowing hope to blind us to the quiet, insistent warnings of our own intuition. But it is also, and more importantly, a story of hope and resilience. It is a story about the unwavering power of friendship embodied by Jessica Riley, whose love for her friend was the spark that ignited the investigation. It is a story about the triumph of reason and courage, personified by Dr. Evelyn Reed, who turned from potential victim to active participant in the pursuit of justice. And most of all, it is a story about the enduring legacy of a life well lived. Sarah Jenkins was targeted because of her goodness, her kindness, and her capacity to love. Her killer believed these were weaknesses. He was wrong. In the end, it was the light of her life, reflected in the love of her family and friends, that illuminated the darkness where he hid, exposing him to the world. Her legacy is not one of victimhood, but one of change, a beacon of light that continues to shine, making the world a little bit safer, a little bit brighter in her name. The final lesson is not to fear connection, but to practice vigilance, to trust that nagging voice in the back of our minds, and to remember that the greatest defense against the predators who walk among us is the strength and love we find in our community.